What if I told you that the person who hurt you the most remembers exactly what they did? Not vaguely, not partially. They remember the words. They remember the moment. They remember the look on your face when something inside you quietly broke. If you are older, if you've lived long enough to know that not all wounds are loud, this question may already feel familiar. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But there is something Jung understood that many people never say out loud. And it's something you deserve to hear, especially now in the later chapters of life. Some people do not forget the harm they caused, they avoid it. And there is a profound difference between the two. Many people watching this have spent decades trying to be reasonable, patient, forgiving. You told yourself, they probably didn't mean it. You waited for understanding. You waited for accountability. You waited for an apology that never came. And what made it harder was this question that kept returning late at night. How can they live so peacefully while I'm still carrying this? Here's the truth Jung uncovered through a lifetime of clinical work. They remember. The person who betrayed you, dismissed you, or quietly erased your reality remembers every critical moment, every broken promise, every boundary crossed, every time they watched you doubt yourself. But remembering would require them to face something they have avoided their entire lives: their shadow. Jung described the shadow as the part of ourselves we refuse to see. The selfishness, the cruelty, the fear, the capacity to hurt others. And Jung discovered something unsettling. The more a person refuses to acknowledge their shadow, the more destructive it becomes. But instead of facing it, many people project it. Projection is not an excuse, it is a mechanism, a way of survival. When someone harms you and then insists you are the problem, what they are really doing is protecting their self-image. Jung called this shadow projection, the unconscious act of placing one's darkness onto another person so they never have to carry it themselves. This is why conversations with them feel impossible. This is why you leave feeling confused. This is why your pain is minimized, questioned, or rewritten. Because acknowledging your pain would mean acknowledging their responsibility, and responsibility requires change. Jung wrote in his private letters, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For many people, that terror is simply too much. So instead, they choose comfort. They build what Jung called the persona, a carefully maintained mask of innocence, reasonableness, and moral superiority. Not just for the world, but for themselves. And when that mask is threatened, they defend it at all costs. This is why some people don't argue. They deflect, they minimize, they go silent. And silence, as Jung understood deeply, is not empty. Silence is power. When someone hurts you and then refuses to speak about it, the emotional burden shifts onto you. You replay conversations. You search for meaning. You wonder what you could have said differently. You carry both sides of the relationship while they carry none. That imbalance slowly erodes your sense of reality. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Jung warned about this exact psychological dynamic. When a person cannot tolerate guilt, they do not process it. They displace it. And the person closest to them becomes the container for everything they refuse to feel. This is why they appear calm while you feel unsettled. This is why they move on while you remain awake at night. It is not because they are stronger. It is because they are disconnected. Jung believed the second half of life is meant for integration, for bringing together the parts of ourselves we ignored while building careers, families, and identities. This is the stage where truth matters more than appearance. But not everyone reaches this stage. Some people remain psychologically frozen in what Jung called the provisional life, a state where comfort replaces growth and self-examination feels like a threat. They avoid depth. They avoid accountability. They avoid conversations that would require humility. And when confronted, they retreat into silence, justification, or distraction. This is not forgetfulness. This is avoidance. And here is the part that matters most for you. The lack of an apology was never a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of their limits. Jung understood that emotional maturity is unevenly distributed. Not everyone develops the capacity to hold two truths at once. I tried my best and I caused harm. Without that capacity, accountability feels like annihilation. So they choose denial instead. In the next part, we'll explore why silence creates emotional dependency, why some people are incapable of genuine remorse, and how recognizing this truth allows you to finally lay down a burden you were never meant to carry alone. If this resonates with you, stay with me. This conversation is not about blame. It is about clarity. As we continue, I want you to slow down for a moment and breathe. If you're older, if you've lived long enough to carry memories that never quite settled, this part may feel uncomfortably familiar. Not because something is wrong with you, but because you've been trying to understand people who were never willing to understand themselves. Carl Jung spent much of his later life studying what happens when human beings avoid inner development. And one of the most disturbing patterns he identified was this. When someone cannot face their own guilt, they do not simply move on from it. They bury it. And buried guilt does not disappear, it turns into control. This is where silence becomes more than absence. It becomes strategy. When someone hurts you and then withdraws, refuses to talk, refuses to explain, refuses to acknowledge, they place you in a psychological bind. Jung understood this deeply. Silence forces the other person to carry the emotional weight alone. You become the one trying to resolve the tension. You search for meaning. You seek clarity. You soften your boundaries just to restore connection. And that creates what Jung identified as psychological dependency. The more they withhold, the more you feel compelled to reach. The more they avoid, the more you explain. The more silent they become, the louder your inner world grows. This is not accidental. Jung discovered that some individuals develop what he called unconscious competence in emotional manipulation. They are not sitting down and planning harm, but they have learned, often early in life, that avoidance protects them. Silence protects them. Emotional distance protects them. So when conflict arises, they do not lean in. They vanish. They distract. They pretend nothing happened. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to doubt yourself. You tell yourself, if it were really serious, they would say something. You tell yourself, maybe I should just let it go. You tell yourself, at my age, I shouldn't still be affected by this. Jung would stop you right there. He believed that emotional pain in the second half of life is not weakness. It is information. It is the psyche demanding honesty. And when that honesty is met with silence, the pain deepens because it is never witnessed. Jung wrote, "The most dangerous thing is to live in a world of projections." And this is exactly what happens when someone refuses accountability. They project their unresolved guilt onto you. You become the carrier of discomfort so they don't have to feel it themselves. This is why they appear calm while you feel unsettled. This is why they sleep while you lie awake replaying conversations. This is why they move forward while you feel stuck. It is not strength, it is disconnection. Another insight Jung uncovered will help you understand why some people are incapable of genuine apologies. He observed that emotional maturity requires the ability to separate behavior from identity. To say, I did something wrong, without collapsing into, I am a bad person. Many people never develop this ability. For them, admitting harm feels like total psychological collapse. Their ego cannot tolerate it. Jung called this state psychological inflation. When the ego becomes so fragile that any challenge to its self-image feels like an existential threat. So instead of apologizing, they defend. Instead of listening, they deflect. Instead of repairing, they disappear. You may have noticed this pattern. When you tried to speak calmly, they changed the subject. When you expressed hurt, they minimized it. When you asked for understanding, they acted confused or offended. This is not misunderstanding, this is defense. Jung observed that when people in this state are confronted, They often retreat into what he called the innocent archetype. They portray themselves as misunderstood, overwhelmed, or unfairly accused. In their inner narrative, they are never the one who caused harm. They are always the one being attacked. And this is why conversations go nowhere. You are speaking from a place of integration. They are responding from a place of protection. Jung believed the second half of life is meant for shadow integration. The willingness to look honestly at one's own capacity to harm, to regret, to fail. But some people refuse this task. They remain emotionally fixed at an earlier stage of development. And here is the part that may quietly relieve you. Their inability to meet you with accountability is not something you caused. It is not something you failed to explain. It is not something more patience would have fixed. It is a ceiling. Jung understood that not everyone reaches the same level of psychological development. Some people stop growing emotionally long before they stop aging physically. They can function in the world, but they cannot sit with guilt, remorse, or repair. So when you waited for closure, you were waiting for something they could not give. This is why Jung warned against expecting depth from people who live on the surface. He believed that wisdom in later life comes from recognizing limits, not just our own, but others. In the next part, we'll explore the most liberating realization Jung ever offered: why you cannot awaken someone who is committed to remaining unconscious, and how accepting this truth allows you to finally reclaim your peace, your energy, and your remaining years with clarity instead of confusion. Stay with me. The most important part is still ahead. Now we arrive at the most difficult truth. And for many people in the later chapters of life, this truth is also the most freeing. Carl Jung eventually realized something that runs against everything we are taught about love, patience, and understanding. You cannot make an unconscious person conscious. You cannot force someone to see what they are psychologically invested in avoiding. And no amount of explaining, forgiving, waiting, or loving will awaken someone who has chosen comfort over growth. Jung warned that the unconscious does not respond to logic or sincerity. It responds only to awareness, and awareness cannot be imposed from the outside. It must be chosen. This is why so many people spend years, sometimes decades, waiting for accountability that never comes. You assume that if you just say it the right way, at the right time, with the right tone, something will finally break through. But Jung understood that what looks like resistance is often limitation. He used the phrase emotional ceiling to describe this phenomenon. Some people simply cannot go beyond a certain level of self-reflection. They can talk about feelings, but they cannot sit with guilt. They can explain themselves, but they cannot repair. They can justify, but they cannot integrate. And this is where so much unnecessary suffering happens. You are asking for depth from someone who only operates on the surface. You are asking for accountability from someone whose ego cannot survive it. You are asking for maturity from someone whose development stopped long ago. Jung compared this to drawing water from an empty well. The well is not broken, it is simply dry, and no amount of effort will produce what is not there. One of Jung's most important discoveries came from his work with psychological repetition. He observed that people who avoid consciousness repeat the same patterns again and again, often hurting different people in the same way, while sincerely believing they are innocent each time. He called this repetition compulsion. These individuals unconsciously choose environments, relationships, and social circles that protect their self-image. They surround themselves with people who don't challenge them, who accept their version of events, who confirm that they are reasonable, kind, misunderstood. Jung referred to this as a psychological echo chamber. And inside that echo chamber, they never have to look in the mirror, because looking in the mirror would require confronting the shadow. And Jung was very clear about this. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Many people build their entire lives around avoiding that terror, so they rewrite history. They cast themselves as the victim. They convince themselves they had no choice. They believe they were provoked, misunderstood, or forced. And over time, this becomes their reality. This is how they sleep at night, not because they don't remember what they did, but because they have separated their actions from their identity so completely that responsibility never lands. Jung called this dissociative competence, the ability to detach emotionally from one's own behavior. It allows a person to feel blameless even when harm is undeniable. But here's the most important realization Jung offered, especially for those in the second half of life. Your healing does not depend on their awakening. Read that again. Your peace does not require their apology. Your closure does not require their understanding. Your worth does not require their validation. Jung believed the later years of life are not meant to be spent chasing resolution from others. They are meant for integration, bringing your own truth back to yourself. When you finally accept that some people cannot meet you where you are, something profound happens. You stop explaining. You stop justifying. You stop waiting, and your energy returns to you. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." The person who hurt you is still dreaming, still projecting, still avoiding, still asleep to their own inner world. But you are awake. You questioned, you reflected, you felt deeply, you sought understanding instead of denial. That is not weakness, that is psychological maturity. And this is where real freedom begins. The most radical act of self-respect is accepting people exactly as they are, without expecting them to become who you need them to be. When you accept someone's limitations, you stop handing them power over your peace. You no longer ask, "Why couldn't they love me better?" You begin to say, "This is as far as they can go," and that clarity changes everything. Jung understood that shadow work is not about fixing others. It is about protecting yourself from repeating patterns that drain your life force. It is about choosing relationships that are capable of reciprocity, honesty, and repair. When you stop investing in emotionally unavailable people, you create space for emotionally mature ones. When you stop carrying the emotional labor alone, you regain your sense of dignity. When you stop chasing closure, you discover that closure was never something they could give you. It was something you were meant to claim. The apology you never received was not proof that you didn't matter. It was evidence of their limits, their ceiling, their refusal to grow. But your growth did not stop, and that is the gift hidden inside the wound. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. You are someone who values truth, someone who can sit with discomfort, someone who is willing to face reality instead of hiding from it. And now you know this. You do not need to wait for unconscious people to wake up in order to move forward. You are already awake, and that is where your peace begins."